Hello, Mystifiers. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone has had a great New Year's today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at 5 urban legends that turned out to be true. So if you enjoy anything mysterious, then go ahead and hit the subscribe button, as that is what this channel is all about. But with that, let's get into these urban legends. Number 1, the Maine Hermit. The first urban legend comes from Maine. According to the local legend of North Pond, a hermit had been living undetected in the woods since the 1980s. Every so often there would be reports of someone or something breaking into the seasonal cabins to steal food and other resources. However, no one could ever prove that this hermit actually existed. And even if there was someone out there, this individual had taken great pains to guarantee his isolation. However, in April 2013, things would start to come to light, as a man by the name of Christopher Thomas Knight was arrested in the deep woods of Maine. The thing about Christopher was that, according to societal records, he didn't even exist. That is because for 27 years he had been camping out in the forest and survived on the meager supplies that he burglarized from the houses in the area. It also turned out that Knight did not have a single conversation with another person for almost 3 decades. In the area near North Pond, Knight's hermitage fomented outrage, intrigue, reverence, and every response in between. Some people came to view Knight as a villain, and others saw him as some kind of folk hero of sorts. Number 2, the boogeyman of New York, Cropsey. If you grew up in New York in the 70s, you probably heard of the tale of the boogeyman named Cropsey. As the urban legend goes, Cropsey was a shadowy figure with a hook for a hand, who was believed to be an escaped patient from a nearby mental institution, who was camping out in its ruins. It was there at these ruins that he supposedly ended the life of young children he kidnapped. The story of Cropsey started out as campfire stories. However, lines between myth and reality began to blur as children around Staten Island really did begin to disappear in the 1970s and the 1980s. And it took years for the person that was responsible to be caught. However, when one girl was found dead, buried in a shallow grave on the abandoned property of the Willowbrook State School, police finally arrested a suspect by the name of Andre Rand. He was a former custodian at the abandoned school, and it was reported that Rand was sleeping in a makeshift camp on its property. And soon Rand came to embody the legend of Cropsey, and he was ultimately convicted of kidnapping 2 of the missing children, and it's widely believed he was responsible for murders of many more, making him one of the most notorious criminals Staten Island has ever known. Number 3, Virginia Bunnyman threatens trespassers with an axe. This urban legend of Virginia has been around for generations, and as the legend goes, an axe-wielding killer who appears in a bloody rabbit costume, known as the Bunnyman, allegedly murders anyone who dares speak his name 3 times while standing beneath the Bunnyman Bridge. And this takes place in the Fairfax County, Virginia, around midnight. And the following encounters come from the website allthat'sinteresting.com. On October 19th, 1970, a cadet at the U.S. Air Force Academy named Robert Bennett was driving with his fiancée on the rural roads of Burke, Virginia near midnight. They were returning from a football game and decided to stop and visit Bennett's uncle, who lived nearby. Bennett parked his car in a field across the street from his uncle's house on Gwenya Road, but before he and his fiancée could get out, they saw something moving near the rear window. Suddenly, there was a loud crash and the front passenger window shattered. A man was standing on the outside shouting, "You're on private property, and I have your tag number." Bennett quickly drove away, but he later found a hatchet on the floorboard of his car. After reporting the incident to police, Bennett informed them the man had been wearing a white suit with bunny ears. His fiancée, however, thought he'd been wearing a white pointed hood. However, just 10 days later, the terrifying bunny man would rear his head once again. On October 29, 1970, confusion was cleared up when a construction security guard named Paul Phillips reported seeing a man in a gray, black, and white rabbit costume. He was standing on the porch of a home that was under construction. Phillips, who was patrolling the new Kings Park West subdivision on Gwenya Road, approached the man around 10:30 p.m. According to an article published in the Minneapolis Star, the man told Phillips, "You are trespassing. If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." The costume criminal then began chopping at a porch post with a hatchet. Phillips left to retrieve his gun, but by the time he returned, the man had disappeared into the trees. The guard told police the suspect was 20 years old, 5 feet 8 inches tall, and weighed about 175 pounds. Number 4, the man actually makes himself fly with balloons. The year was 1997 and the internet was a fairly new thing. However, that would not stop the next story from circulating. The story on the internet went like this. Larry's boyhood dream was to fly. When he graduated from high school, he joined the Air Force in hopes of becoming a pilot. Unfortunately, poor eyesight disqualified him. When he was finally discharged, he had to satisfy himself with watching jets fly over his backyard. One day, Larry had a bright idea. He decided to fly. He went to his local Army Navy surplus store and purchased 45 weather balloons and several tanks of helium. The weather balloons, when fully inflated, would measure more than 4 feet across. Back home, Larry securely strapped the balloons to his sturdy lawn chair. He anchored the chair to his Jeep and inflated the balloons. He climbed on for a test while it was still only a few feet above the ground. Satisfied it would work, Larry packed several sandwiches, a 6-pack of Miller Lite, loaded his pellet gun, figuring he could pop a few balloons when it was time to descend, and went back to the floating lawn chair. He tied himself in along with his pellet gun and provisions. Larry's plan was to lazily float up to a height of about 30 feet above his backyard after surveying the anchor, and in a few hours he would come back down. However, things didn't quite work out the way he was expecting. When he cut the cord anchoring the lawn chair to the Jeep, he didn't float lazily up to 30 feet or so. Instead, he streaked into the LA sky as if shot from a cannon. He didn't level at 30 feet, nor did he level at 100 feet. After climbing and climbing, he leveled off at 11,000 feet. And at this height, he couldn't risk shooting any of the balloons, lest he would unbalance the load and really find himself in trouble. So he stayed there, drifting cold and frightened, for more than 14 hours. Then he really got into trouble. He found himself drifting into the primary approach corridor of the Los Angeles International Airport. It was a United pilot that first spotted Larry. He radioed the tower and described passing a guy in a lawn chair with a gun. Radar did confirm the existence of an object floating 11,000 feet above the airport. LAX emergency procedures swung into full alert, and a helicopter was dispatched to investigate. LAX is right on the ocean. Night was falling and the offshore breeze began to flow. It carried Larry out to sea with the helicopter in hot pursuit. And several miles out, the helicopter caught up with Larry. Once the crew determined that Larry was not dangerous, they attempted to close in for a rescue, but the draft from the blades would push Larry away whenever they neared. Finally, the helicopter ascended to a position several hundred feet above Larry and lowered a rescue line. Larry snagged the line and was hauled back to shore. The difficult maneuver was flawlessly executed by the helicopter crew. As soon as Larry was hauled to earth, he was arrested by waiting members of the LAPD for violating LAX airspace. As he was led away in handcuffs, a reporter dispatched to cover the daring rescue asked why he had done it. Larry stopped, turned, and replied nonchalantly, "A man can't just sit around." This story actually was true, although Larry had actually made his flight 15 years earlier, and many of the details presented in the 1997 web version were made up or greatly embellished. Larry had planned to fly 300 miles into the Mojave Desert, but the balloons took him up faster than expected, and the wind really didn't cooperate with him. Then Larry found himself quickly drifting 16,000 feet above Long Beach, and in the thin air, Larry did eventually start feeling cold and dizzy. So he took out his pellet gun, shot several of the balloons to bring himself back down, eventually coming to a stop in a set of high voltage power lines where the plastic tethers protected Larry from being electrocuted. Number 5. Charlie No Face. This final urban legend takes place in Pennsylvania and is known as Charlie No Face or the Green Man. As the legend goes, there is a no-faced man that stalks the remote streets of western Pennsylvania at night. The Green Man glows green as a result of being struck by lightning or being shocked in some kind of industrial accident. He also haunts South Park, the North Hills, or the county lanes around Washington, Pennsylvania. However, it actually turned out that the Green Man was actually a real man who went by the name Raymond Robinson. In 1919, when Raymond Robinson was 8 years old, he was reaching for a bird's nest at the top of an electrical pole when he was suddenly shocked with 11,000 volts of electricity and sent flying to the ground in a blinding flash. The high voltage shock burnt Robinson's face and arms, leaving holes where his eyes and nose once were. Despite the horrific injury, reports at the time noted that he was in good spirits and that he could still hear and talk. For the next 65 years, he would sequester himself in his family home in Coppell, Pennsylvania, making belts, wallets, and doormats and selling them to generate a small income. He would only leave his house on walks he took in the dead of night to avoid scaring people with his appearance. It was from these walks that the legend of the Green Man started to develop when high school kids would spot him from the car walking along State Route 351. Local residents that knew Raymond would say that he was actually a hell of a guy. And in 1985, Raymond Robinson would pass away at the age of 74 from natural causes, but though he may be gone, the legend of Green Man and Charlie No Face is alive today as ever. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you did, feel free to check out the other content on the channel and feel free to leave a subscribe. Also, if you made it this far, feel free to leave a comment on what story you found to be the most shocking. But with that, that will do it for today, and I will catch you on the next video. Peace.